How's everybody doing? Thanks for coming out this morning. I'm Michael Shaw with the Hudson Weber Foundation. I have the privilege in helping steward the legacies of the Hudson families and the Weber families and the J.L. Hudson Corporation, which together founded a foundation about 80 years ago, focused on economic prosperity in Detroit. And we continue that legacy on to this day, and it's an honor to serve in that role. As we've been doing this work, we recognize that no matter how large our assets are, they're never large enough to solve the challenges or embrace all the opportunities that we're experiencing here in Detroit. So we lean deeply into partnership, and these are represent four groups that we partner with and look to partner with here in Detroit. And the goal of this session is to have fun, raise energy, be aspirational, and talk through some of the challenges that they're all having as they come into town. So we have Laura Graneman, who's representing the Gilbert Family Foundations. Is that how we're calling it these days, when the Rocket Conglomerate of Philanthropies? Is that accurate?
That's very close. It's the Gilbert Family Foundation and the Rocket Community Fund.
And Paul Vlasic, who's representing his family office, and Detroit's Share Detroit. And Lynette from DTE Foundation, and John Simon with Greenlight Fund. I'm gonna have you guys just run through, do a quick opening of what you're all up to, and then I'm gonna hopefully instigate you into further conversation, and then hopefully engage you all. Invite audience participation and conversation around what these guys are up to and what they're trying to solve and how you all can participate in that process. Laura, you wanna go first?
Sure, so as Michael said, my name is Laura Graneman. I lead philanthropy for the Rock family of companies, so the Rocket Community Fund and the Gilbert Family Foundation. And we really think about trying to utilize all of the assets and skill sets that we have in the Rock family of companies and deploying those things creatively into our communities as well. Because that's what makes us uniquely who we are. Those are the things that we're really good at. Dan is an entrepreneur. Dan Gilbert, our founder, is an entrepreneur. We are a housing organization. We are a massive mortgage company. So how do we lean into the things that we know and we have lots of skill sets and talents and assets around? So those are the big pieces that we tend to focus on are housing, employment, and public life. And we try to think a little differently about how we deploy our funding and our resources. We're always doing what we call tying threads, connecting dots across different areas of our business, across different areas of our community, and building partnerships to try to think innovatively about how we can leverage the many assets of our community to drive systemic change. So a lot of what we do is think about policy change and how can the investments that we're making drive policy change as well. We just this past year were very blessed to be able to announce a $500 million collective commitment across the Rocket Community Fund and the Gilbert Family Foundation over the next 10 years in the city of Detroit. And we are really looking to, through that commitment, build opportunity and equity across our community. And we think about that by really looking deeply at people who are at risk of losing their homes, either through tax foreclosure or eviction, doing some work with them to stabilize that home experience, and then staying with them for a long period of time over the course of the next year or 2 years, and really deeply understanding from their personal perspective, what are the other economic challenges in their life that we can then work together to address. Because too often we're making decisions as philanthropy without that human experience at the core, at the center. So for example, we made a $15 million commitment to paying off the back taxes of low-income homeowners in the city of Detroit. We've been deeply invested in property tax foreclosure prevention and reform for the last 10 years. And this was sort of the culmination of a lot of policy work, a lot of community work, a lot of partnership. And that investment we anticipate will be able to serve about 20,000 families in our community. But we don't want to stop there. We don't think that just because you're not going to lose your house that is enough, right? So really thinking holistically about the other pieces of that puzzle that need to be there in order to be supportive of those families.
we've all read and seen the bold impact that Dan and Jennifer Gilbert have had in this town, and $500 million is a serious investment. How do you think about that in terms of neighborhoods? And is the money predetermined already? Do you know where it's going? How are you thinking about opportunity?
No, we don't know where it's going, but that's the exciting part, is that we're open to learning together. We're open to really being asking those questions of our community, and working with that cohort of, in this case, about 20,000 families who we want to learn more from, who we want to directly listen to be able to then deploy additional funds in the coming years. So it's not predetermined. It's not happening in a back room. It is really a community effort to understand, learn from these families, and then work with community groups collectively to address those challenges. I'll give you an example. The very first thing, so in the city of Detroit, we've had about 150,000 property tax foreclosures in the last 15 years. It's been a huge, I would say epidemic, but that feels inappropriate at this point. That would normally be what I would say. It's been a huge force that has really wiped out a lot of wealth, and in particular, Black wealth in the city of Detroit that's been generational over time. And we've been able to work with partners to drive policy change, to think differently about this problem, because it's not just one person's problem or one entity's problem. It's no one individual's fault, but it's a lot of factors, systemic factors that came together to drive this force. So thinking in that way about how can we systemically address these issues, not just a Band-Aid, not just addressing it for one person, but when you start to look across 150,000 or 20,000 people, you start to see trends and understand where things are not lining up in support of those families. So that's our goal.
It is no coincidence that this may sound familiar to what Anika and Dr. Perry and Wendy and Sonia just spoke about, right? These are all our collaborators, partners, and co-conspirators in instigating change here in Detroit. Lynette, we spent a great time at Beacon Park the other night, and last night I think a lot of us had a lot of fun around the neighborhood at D-Electricity, thanks to DTE Foundation and other partners. DTE has been known as a corporate partner in town for fully activating all of its assets. You don't just write checks for sponsorships, but you activate your business lines, your procurement, your foundation, your senior leadership to boards and to partnerships and to leadership, and your policy teams. What's ahead? What are you guys up to, and how do you do that? How do you think about it? And hit on Connected Futures, because I love that thing. We funded it, and it's been great.
There's a lot in that question.
Yeah, I know.
There's a lot in that question. So,
you got a lot to say.
So first of all, I'll say thank you for having me today, and welcome to all our expats. Thrilled to see all of you live and those that are streaming. So DTE Foundation, really at the core of what we do is we're focused on being a source for growth and prosperity in the communities where we live and serve. And as a utility, the way we think about being a force for growth and prosperity is, and I was just talking with John about this before we came on stage, is that our CEO, Jerry Norcia, says if our most vulnerable resident is not successful, we as a company cannot be successful. So when you take that into your thought process culturally as a corporation, I manage our board service. Every single executive on our board is expected and very active and loves to be on. We serve on over 40 boards from an executive team perspective. And that means we want to have a voice in helping our community thrive. And Beacon Park is a beautiful example of that. I don't know if any of our participants here got out to Beacon Park last night, but basically it was a parking lot just on the other side of our corporate headquarters. And our previous CEO looked out and said, we can do better in this neighborhood. And we spent a few years building out a park that now is activated every single day. I can't tell you how much fun and how much noise and how much dancing was going on at Beacon Park last night connected to De-Electricity. And we sponsored De-Electricity this week really to bring the community together. And one of the things that we do in these spaces is we really look for opportunities to make it free for the public to come in and enjoy our city, come in and enjoy our region. And the DTE Foundation supports the entire region, the entire state of Michigan. We're headquartered in Detroit. Detroit is our home, so that's our predominant investment space. But if not for the partnerships of people like we have on the panel today, we would never be able to be as successful as we are from an impact perspective. Connected Futures is a great example of that, right? Last year, COVID hit. We knew our students in the city of Detroit did not have connectivity, did not have computers, and they were homebound. And we didn't know how long they would be homebound. But we as a community of philanthropy in business and the educational system said, it doesn't matter if this COVID pandemic, which nobody knew, is it gonna last a few months, a few weeks, or a few years? So we rallied with many on this team to pull together $23 million. And I think we did it. I think we had commitments for $23 million in about 2 weeks. We purchased 51,000 laptops. We got them out to all the students. The students were able to be successful last year to be in school. And it wasn't just about the students, by the way, included connectivity for these laptops. But it wasn't just for the students. The families benefited in a significant way. The families could get access to jobs, applications, where to find COVID vaccine opportunities, how to access resources for support. And it just wasn't a question. It just wasn't a question. We as a philanthropic community and an organization said, if not now, when? Right? And I think that connectivity for our students, that one incident will change the trajectory. And I know Laura's team leads Connect 313 that's helping us make sure we keep connectedness throughout the region. Couldn't have done it without a community that leans on one another, that trusts one another, and that really is invested in making a difference with one another.
I think part of the story that folks may not know is that DTE and Quicken and Rocket family of businesses and the other corporate partners on this effort were so committed to seeing this happen that they pulled the trigger on the supply chain efforts and purchasing these devices before they had raised the philanthropic capital, because they knew they were just going to stand behind this effort no matter what. And then they all worked the phones really, really hard to make sure to get the foundations and the other corporate partners involved. And we're grateful that they did, because it's an important part. And I do want to come back to both Laura and Lynette to talk about what's ahead for that body of work, because COVID was, it continues to be, a disruption for all of us. But so much of what we've all come together around related to COVID and COVID response has future impacts and requires future supports. We've learned a lot, and we have a lot more to invest in together. Paul, talk to me. You're coming into Detroit a little newer from a philanthropic perspective, and curious in trying to explore ways to get your family and your partners and your corporate friends to engage differently, and you found some challenges in doing that.
We have. I appreciate being invited on this panel this morning. It helps to give a little bit of background to lead into what Share Detroit really is. So family's longtime Detroiters. I mean, everybody probably has a story like this, but I can remember my mom telling me she used to walk 2 blocks to the trolley on Woodward to go down to Hudson's. And so we've been here a long time, and my parents instilled in me and my 4 brothers, the importance of giving, right? Time and treasure, you have to commit. And, as we grew up, they took their legacy relationships, which you would expect, right? Educational, healthcare, faith-based, and passed them along to us. And I would say Share Detroit was really started in acknowledgement that people do good, and what we talk about is doing good differently than my parents did, or maybe even so that I did or are doing. So we think that, philanthropy's changed a ton in the last 10 years, let alone the last 50 years when my parents started giving. People give differently, they give to different organizations. And Share Detroit is really intended to be a platform that connects volunteers and donors to grassroots organizations in Detroit, so that people can, again, do good. We thought that the background of the Detroit resurgence was the opportunity to try to instigate that. So we took kind of a startup mentality, created a minimal viable product, test marketed it, got it out in the market, trying to do it. It launched in January, February of this year. We don't know what it looks like, honestly, right? Is it a platform for the ages? Maybe not. But if it lasts, if it sticks, if it makes a difference, 5 or 10 years, it should look very different than it does today. We don't have the right answers right now, but we're narrowing in, I think, on making a difference. We've got 200 nonprofits on the platform today, with 50 in our pipeline, so to speak, to be approved. And just to give kind of an example or tangible examples of what we do, right? So, and I'm going to make sure I got my notes right. So there's a nonprofit called Imagine Mentoring, which works with young women, to be successful in the city. And there's a volunteer that came through the portal called, her name's Christy. She's from Magna International, and she was really interested in board engagement. She wanted to be a board member, right? So we're making that connection. So there's an example of somebody that wants to work very deeply in a nonprofit that they might not have had access to before. And then another example is a woman by the name of Julie went to Kevin's Song, and some of you may know what Kevin's Song is, right? It's a support group and education for parents of kids that have committed suicide. And she committed to working and setting up for the gala, right? Very different experience. But again, it's trying to provide access to the volunteers to nonprofits in the city and try to make that match so that we're successful. And I think the things that I'm really focused on is how do we build trust with the community, right? The community being all the constituents, right? The volunteers, the donors, the nonprofits, and ultimately corporate sponsors, because the model is free, right? It's intended not to take any of the dollars out of the system that might be going to these nonprofits. And then, the other thing that we're trying to do is to build trust is by asking and listening, right? We really want to understand if we're adding value. Are we actually helping the nonprofits fulfill their mission? I mean, essentially that's our mission, right? Can we help them do it better and more efficiently, provide access to donors and volunteers that they wouldn't have normally had? Because if you think of large, well-staffed, well-funded nonprofits, they can deal with access, right? They can generate access. The small nonprofit struggles with that, so that's what we're really trying to do.
I think that's great, and we all know from our homecoming experience, whether it's this one or previous ones that you've all attended, that highly curated programming like this gives exposure to great organizations. But how do we democratize that access and create the platforms that allow a greater flow of resources, particularly human resources, to our sector? And I think it's awesome that you're exploring it. What's been the hardest part?
Well, first, convincing nonprofits to get on the platform.
Really?
Right? Is it really free? Does it really do something? What does it do for us, right? I think we then got over that hurdle. We've got a lot of people interested. Now what worries me is what's the transactional stuff, right? Are we actually connecting volunteers to opportunities? Are we actually connecting dollars to opportunities? And how can we morph that experience so it works really well? So we're trying to spend maybe some of the folks in our organization might chagrin. I think we need to spend a lot of time on making sure that we serve those 200 nonprofits really well before we go to 5 or 6 or 1,000 nonprofits, because I think in that expansion is if we're not doing it well, it won't last. I think, again, kind of a startup mentality, right? Real tight feedback loop, trying to constantly reach out to them, trying to get information from not only the volunteer, but also for the nonprofit on how the experience worked and how can we change it, and we'll change it, and we'll just keep iterating on it till we see the success that we'd like to see.
So John, being mindful of the clock that you guys can't see, but we're desperately watching run out in front of us, the rest of the time is yours. Can you talk about Greenlight Fund and talk about what you're trying to do? You're using both what would be traditional private sector tactics while also elevating and thinking through more community engagement, marrying them with community engagement processes to start to solve for poverty and economic mobility. How's that working? How do you do it in other markets? How are you doing it here? And how do you share?
Yeah, so briefly, we set up Greenlight as a community-driven nonprofit that sits in a city, and every year on behalf of that city, in a community-driven way, working together with residents, with the community, identifies a gap or an issue or a metric around low-income children and families that's not moving. hasn't moved the way people want it to move. And then we identify a successful model that has worked in multiple other places but is in our city. And then we bring it to our city, working together with residents to really bring and root that model in community, get it successful, and then create change on that particular metric or issue. And we do that in a community-driven way in every city that we're in, one issue per year, year after year after year. And so over time, in 20 years, for instance, to address 16 issues at scale in a metric moving way can really make a difference for the community in a very, very significant way and help those that are getting left behind with economic social mobility and really make an impact at scale in a community. We originated in Boston about 16 years ago, and in 16 years we've addressed 13 poverty-oriented metrics, flipping outcomes from X to Y across those issues, reaching about 300,000 children and families a year, and bringing models that have actually brought about 150 million in follow-on state, federal, and other revenue to our nonprofit ecosystem in Boston, adding to the nonprofit pie. Because that's a really important thing we're all trying to do, is how do we add to the resources? How do we add to the investment? And you heard that in other panels. Well, having started this about 16 years ago in Boston, it's now become a bit of a movement. We are now in 10 cities, soon to be 13 cities, have impacted residents in those cities around a whole range of issues in a community-driven way. And this year, in the next 12 to 24 months, we'll probably reach about 1 million children and families across our cities. Detroit was our 5th city, and it's run by Rishi Madgil, our talented executive director of Greenlight Detroit. And in 4 years, we've done 3 things that are having a significant impact here that are all led by Detroiters, all making a huge difference. And in many ways, Detroit has been a leader in this whole network. And we don't have the time to go into it, but the amazing things that Rishi and team here have done have actually created examples and learning and data that are going to ripple across our network and actually benefit families in Kansas City or families in Charlotte or communities in the Bay Area. So this is what we do, and Detroit's been a real leader in this network. We've been here for 4 years, and look forward to the next 20 and beyond.
Greenlight has successfully imported 3 really amazing evidence-based organizations into this town: the New Teacher Center, Center for Employment Opportunities, and Springboard to Opportunities, addressing literacy and transitional jobs for returning citizens, and how do we attract and retain new teachers here in town. And it's been really amazing. I'm excited for what's ahead. We're getting the hook, but what I do promise you is I'm going to retain all of them to sign autographs outside. So please join us and talk about how you can be engaged and find these folks. They're awesome. Thank you.